I can't have kids, she said weakly. Cowboy smirked. Mine been waiting for a mother like you. The wind moved like a whisper between them, carrying the ache of two hearts that had forgotten how to dream. She looked at him with eyes that once knew hope, and he met her gaze like a man who'd been waiting for something he didn't know he'd lost. The stagecoach stopped in a cloud of dust outside Red Ridge Ranch, the air sharp with pine and silence. Evelyn Ward stepped down, clutching a worn satchel that had been stitched too many times. Her pale blue dress fluttered in the wind, same color as the mountains rising behind the ranch house. She looked up at the weathered building, a home to someone, though not yet to her. The place smelled of hay, smoke, and something tender buried under years of labor. Luke Harland stood on the porch, boots planted firm, coat half-buttoned, hat pulled low. The late sun caught the edge of his jaw, bronzed and hard from years in the saddle. Beside him, 3 children stood quietly, eyes wide, clothes patched at the elbows. The youngest clutched a ragged doll. The middle one, freckled solemn, stared without blinking. The oldest, a boy no more than 11, stood half behind Luke, his stance mirroring the man's, protective and unsure. Evelyn hesitated before the steps. She had rehearsed what to say, how to sound useful, how to seem fine, but her voice betrayed her before she even spoke. "Mr. Harland," she began softly, "I was told you needed help, someone to teach, to keep order in the house, perhaps." Luke's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. "That what they told you?" "Yes," she said, clutching the strap of her satchel. "I can cook, mend, teach the little ones their letters. I don't take up much space." He leaned against the post, silent for a moment too long. Then in a voice as even as gravel, he asked, "You ever had children of your own?" Her throat tightened. She hadn't planned on that question. For a moment, all she could hear was the creak of the porch boards, the rustle of wind through the pines. Her hands trembled slightly. "No," she said, and when he didn't look away, she added, "I can't have children." Something flickered in his expression, maybe surprise, maybe recognition. Then the faintest curve touched the corner of his mouth, not mockery, not pity, but something quieter. "Good," he said simply. "Mine been waiting for a mother like you." The words landed soft but heavy, as though the earth itself had paused to listen. Evelyn blinked, unsure if she'd heard right, but Luke turned then, motioning for her to follow. "Come on, you'll stay in the East Room. Kids'll show you around." The children didn't speak as she followed them through the yard. A brown horse watched from the corral, tail flicking against flies. The air smelled of dust and cut grass. Inside, the house breathed in silence, the kind that came from missing laughter too long. The kitchen was tidy but worn, table carved with scratches from years of small hands and quick meals. The girl with the doll finally spoke. "Papa says you'll teach us reading." Evelyn smiled faintly, kneeling so they were eye level. "If you'd like me to." The girl nodded once, then whispered, "My name's Ada, that's Ruth, and he's Tom." Evelyn looked up at the boy. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet curiosity in his eyes. "Hello, Tom," she said gently. He nodded, then looked toward the doorway where Luke stood, leaning against the frame with crossed arms, watching after supper, cornbread, beans, and the kind of coffee that could stand on its own. Luke carried a lantern to the guest room. "Ain't much, but it's dry," he said, setting the light on the table. A single bed, a dresser, and a small window that looked out over the fading fields. "It's perfect," she said quietly. He nodded once, then paused before leaving. "Kids go quiet around strangers. Give 'em time. They'll come around." "I don't mind quiet," she said. "Good. This place has plenty of it." When he left, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Outside, the night stretched endless and deep. She thought of the years behind her, of the doctor's shaking head, the way her husband's silence had grown heavier until even his goodbye was wordless. She'd buried hope with her child, and since then had carried only the weight of what could never be. But tonight, for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely empty. She felt watched, not in fear but in quiet awareness. From the next room, she could hear soft giggles, the children whispering about her, inventing stories. She smiled without meaning to. Morning came slow and gold. She woke to the sound of hoofbeats and a rooster crowing somewhere near the barn. When she stepped into the kitchen, the children were already seated, half asleep, while Luke poured milk into tin cups. He looked up when she entered. "You're early," he said. Couldn't sleep, she replied, rolling her sleeves. I thought I'd start the porridge. He gestured to the pot. Stove's stubborn. Gotta coax it to behave. She struck the match and smiled faintly. I've dealt with worse. He didn't argue. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was alive, like a current humming under skin. When breakfast ended, she led the children outside with a slate and chalk. The sun climbed slow behind the hills, painting everything in the color of second chances. She drew letters in the dirt, her voice soft but steady. Ruth repeated after her. Ada hummed. And Tom tried not to look interested but was the first to get every word right. Luke watched from the porch, arms crossed, one corner of his mouth lifted slightly. He wasn't a man used to smiling, but something about the sight, his children sitting still, listening, laughing, made the hard edges of his face loosen. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found the smallest girl sitting alone near the barn, crying quietly. Ruth, she asked, crouching beside her. The child sniffed. Mama used to braid my hair before church. Evelyn hesitated. Would you like me to try? Ruth nodded. Evelyn's fingers worked gently through the tangles, slow and careful, until the braid lay smooth against the girl's shoulder. Ruth turned, studying her face. You look sad sometimes, she whispered. Evelyn's breath caught. Sometimes, she said softly, but it passes. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped onto the porch for air. The valley spread wide under a half moon, silvering the grass. Luke was there, sitting on the step, sharpening his knife against a whetstone. He didn't look up when he said, Kids like you. They're good children, she answered. They didn't talk for near a year after their mother passed. His voice was steady, but the words carried a kind of exhaustion that didn't come from work. After that, I figured maybe quiet was all right. Evelyn leaned against the railing. Quiet keeps you from hearing what hurts, until it doesn't anymore. He paused, the blade stilling in his hand. You talk like someone who knows. I do. She looked out across the fields. I buried a son before I ever held him. He said nothing for a long time. The only sound was the wind brushing the tall grass. Finally, he placed the knife aside and stood. You did right coming here, he said quietly. This place needs someone who remembers how to care. And what about you? She asked. Who takes care of you, Mr. Harland? He met her gaze. Don't rightly know. Maybe that's changing. The words lingered between them, heavy and unspoken. He tipped his hat slightly and walked inside, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Evelyn remained on the porch, staring after him, her pulse unsteady. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, fully, quietly, dangerously seen. When she finally went to bed, the night pressed warm against the window. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder murmured low. A storm was coming, but it wasn't fear she felt. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like a heartbeat learning to trust again. The morning mist rolled over the valley like a pale ghost, softening the edges of the ranch and the mountain beyond. Evelyn stepped out into the chill air, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Dew clung to the grass and the scent of wet earth filled her lungs. Inside the house, faint noises stirred, the soft thud of boots, the sleepy murmur of children waking. This was how each day began now, steady as breathing. She had been at Red Ridge Ranch for 3 weeks. The days had found a rhythm. Lessons after breakfast, chores after lessons, laughter sneaking in between like sunlight through the cracks. Evelyn never meant to stay long. She told herself it was temporary, just until she could find somewhere quieter, somewhere that didn't remind her of everything she had lost. But the house had begun to change her, or maybe she had begun to change it. Luke came in from the barn, brushing straw from his sleeves. His voice was low, still heavy with morning. You're up early again. Habit, she said, handing him a cup of coffee. Sleep doesn't come easy. He nodded, taking the cup. His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm. It does here eventually, he said, glancing toward the window where dawn bled across the hills. This place makes you tired in the right way. Evelyn smiled faintly, but her eyes drifted to the children gathered near the table. Ada was helping Ruth tie her ribbons, while Tom wrestled with his boots, pretending not to notice that she was watching. They were laughing quietly about something small and secret. She realized then that she couldn't remember the last time she'd woken to the sound of laughter. Later that morning, she sat with them beneath the big oak behind the house, slate and chalk spread across a blanket. The air smelled of sap and sun. What's this letter? She asked, drawing an S in the dirt. Snake, Ada answered quickly. Or sky, Ruth added. Tom hesitated, then smirked. Or stubborn like Pa, Evelyn bit back a laugh. All correct answers. Luke was mending a fence nearby, pretending not to listen. But when Tom's last remark reached him, she caught the faintest twitch of amusement on his face. By midday, the sky had turned white-hot, and the air shimmered over the fields. Evelyn carried water to the children, her palms dusted with chalk and soil. She found Luke crouched by the trough, sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening his shirt. He was working a twisted piece of wire free, muttering under his breath. You need another pair of hands? She asked. He glanced up, and for a moment his expression softened. Wouldn't hurt. She knelt beside him, gripping the post as he pulled the wire taut. Their shoulders brushed. For a heartbeat, the air between them thickened with something unspoken. Neither of them looked away. Careful, he murmured finally. You'll get a splinter. I can manage. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. I'm starting to believe that. When the fence was done, they walked back toward the house together. The silence between them wasn't empty. It hummed quietly, like the sound of a distant storm. That evening, Evelyn found Ada in the kitchen stirring soup with a wooden spoon almost too big for her hands. Pa says it's your turn to make supper, Ada said proudly. Is that so? Evelyn asked. Uh-huh. He said yours tastes better. Evelyn laughed softly, stirring the pot. Then we better not disappoint him. Luke came in as the table was being set. The smell of soup filled the room, warm and thick with herbs. The children sat close, whispering and giggling. Luke leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in years, the house sounded alive. When they sat to eat, Tom asked, Miss Evelyn, why don't you ever talk about your home? The question hit her like a small blow. She set her spoon down carefully. Because some homes, she said quietly, are better left behind. Luke's eyes lifted to hers, steady and kind. He didn't press, and she was grateful for that. After supper, she washed the dishes while Luke tended the fire. The room glowed amber, shadows dancing against the wooden walls. You ever get used to it? She asked suddenly. He looked over his shoulder. What's that? Losing someone. Waking up every day knowing they won't walk through that door again. His hands stilled. No, he said after a moment. You don't get used to it. You just get better at pretending you did. Their eyes met across the dim kitchen. In that quiet, she felt something shift, something raw and fragile. That night, a storm rolled in from the west. The sky bruised dark and heavy, thunder muttering low over the hills. Evelyn closed the shutters while Luke secured the horses in the barn. The wind pressed against the windows like a restless spirit. When he came back in, rain was already falling, hard and cold. Best stay inside, he said, shaking off his coat. The children huddled near the fire, eyes wide with excitement. It's loud, Ada whispered. Storms can be, Evelyn said, settling beside her. But they always pass. A crack of lightning split the sky and Ruth jumped, spilling her cup of milk. Evelyn reached to steady her hand. You're safe, sweetheart. Luke watched from the doorway, his face half in shadow. Something about the way she held the child, gentle, certain, pulled at him. He remembered his late wife, the soft hum of her voice in storms long ago. The ache that came with the memory was still there, but it no longer hollowed him out. Instead, it made space for something else, something quieter, gentler. Hours passed before the thunder eased. When the house grew still, Evelyn rose to check the children's room. Ruth was already asleep, one small hand clutching Evelyn's shawl like a promise. She lingered there, smoothing the blanket, whispering a wordless prayer. When she turned, Luke was standing in the doorway. She won't let go of you, he said softly. Evelyn smiled faintly. I don't mind. You're good with them. I just listen, she said. Sometimes that's all they need, he nodded, stepping closer. The firelight flickered across his face. Haven't seen the house this calm since... He stopped himself, swallowing the rest. Since her? Evelyn asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. Since her. I'm not her, she said quietly. I know, he replied, voice low. That's what makes it different. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain softening against the roof. When he finally moved, he brushed past her so close she could feel the warmth of him. Get some rest, he murmured. Long day tomorrow, but she didn't sleep right away. She sat by the window long after the lamps were out, watching the last drops slide down the glass. Her reflection looked softer than she remembered, her eyes less hollow. Somewhere deep inside, a pulse of something alive stirred again. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and bright. Evelyn stepped outside to hang the laundry. The grass sparkled with dew, and the scent of rain lingered. Luke was already in the yard, splitting logs, his shirt damp from sweat and sun. She watched him for a moment, his rhythm, his steadiness. Then he looked up, catching her gaze. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was its own kind of language now. Inside, the children were laughing again. Ada and Ruth had taken over the parlor with their chalk and drawings, while Tom practiced carving shapes into scrap wood. The house, once a hollow of grief, now carried the hum of life. Evelyn felt it in her bones, the fragile, aching piece of belonging. That evening, as the sky bled orange over the valley, she stood on the porch. Luke joined her, wiping his hands with a rag. The children's voices echoed faintly from inside. "You've done something to this place," he said. "I only swept floors and read books," she answered. He shook his head. "No, you breathed air into it again." She looked out at the horizon. It wasn't just the house that needed it. Luke turned toward her, eyes steady and unguarded. "You staying for good, Evelyn?" She hesitated, the breeze catching her hair. "I don't know yet. Well," he said quietly, his mouth curving into the faintest smile. "I figure the ones worth keeping never plan on staying. They just do." She looked at him then. Really looked. The man who had built a life out of loss, who still managed to stand tall in the wreckage. And for the first time, she wanted to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because here, in the echo of laughter and the smell of rain-soaked pine, her heart was learning how to live again. The wind changed that morning. It carried dust instead of dew, and a silence that felt uneasy. Evelyn noticed it first when she stepped outside to gather the washing line. The birds that usually sang from the fence posts were gone. The sky hung low and pale, a strange stillness stretching across the valley. She didn't know why, but her chest felt tight, like the world was holding its breath for something that hadn't yet happened. Inside, Luke was mending a saddle strap at the table. The children scattered around him, arguing softly over chalk drawings. He looked up when the sound of hooves broke through the quiet. A single rider approached, dust rising behind him like smoke. His coat was dark, his hat pulled low, his horse too clean for a ranch road. Luke's jaw tightened as he stood. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and joined him on the porch just as the stranger pulled up. "Morning," the man said, dismounting. His voice was clipped, official. "Name's Marshal Devlin from the county office in Bozeman. I need a word with Mr. Harland." Luke's tone stayed even. "You're having it." The marshal nodded, glancing toward the house where the children's faces pressed against the window. "You've got 3 minors under your roof, none of them carrying your name. That right?" Luke's eyes darkened. "That's right." The marshal pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. "Then this is for you. Territory law requires proper guardianship records for all dependents. Someone in town raised a concern, said the children aren't bloodkin and the house doesn't meet schooling requirements." Evelyn stepped forward, heart hammering. "Concern from who?" "Doesn't matter," the marshal said. "There'll be a hearing in 10 days. Until then, a county agent will be sent to evaluate conditions. If the paperwork doesn't check out, the children will be placed under state care." Ruth's voice carried faintly from behind the window. "What's he saying, Pa?" Luke didn't answer. He stared at the paper, fingers tightening around it. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "They're not going anywhere." "That's not for you to decide," the marshal replied. "I'm just doing my job." He tipped his hat politely to Evelyn, then mounted again. "You got 10 days, Mr. Harland. Get your affairs in order." They watched him ride off until the dust settled. Only then did Evelyn look at Luke. "What will you do?" He didn't answer. He just turned and walked inside, the door creaking shut behind him. That night the ranch was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The children had gone to bed early, though Evelyn doubted they'd slept. Luke sat at the table, the notice lying flat before him. He hadn't spoken in hours. When Evelyn finally touched his shoulder, he exhaled sharply, like a man who'd been holding everything in too long. "I ain't got papers," he said. "Never did. Then we'll fix that," he shook his head. "You don't understand. Tom's parents died in a fire up near Flat Creek. No one claimed him. Ada was left on the church steps in Red Fork. Ruth's mother worked for a mining camp, passed when she was 2. I just took 'em in. Evelyn's throat tightened. You saved them. I gave them a roof, he said quietly. But that don't count for much when the law wants proof. They'll take them, Evelyn. You know they will. She moved closer, kneeling beside him. Then we fight. We find someone in town who'll vouch for you for this place. There must be people who've seen how you care for them. He looked down at her, his face carved with exhaustion. Why do you care so much? She didn't answer right away. Her hand came to rest over his. Because I know what it feels like to lose a family you never got to keep. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly, his fingers closed around hers, rough and trembling. The next morning, Evelyn hitched the wagon herself. Luke tried to protest, but she cut him off. You said 10 days. We'll make everyone count. The journey to town was long, the trail winding through dry ridges and tall grass swaying in the wind. When they reached Bozeman, the streets were loud, too full of strangers and voices. She visited the schoolhouse first, then the church, then the general store, asking anyone who'd seen the Harlan family to write a letter of testimony. Some did gladly, others hesitated, whispering about rumors, about a man raising other folks' children without proper claim. By nightfall, Evelyn had a stack of letters in blistered hands. When she returned to the ranch, Luke was sitting on the porch, a lantern burning beside him. You've been gone near all day, he said. Gathering proof, she replied, handing him the bundle. Enough to make them listen. He thumbed through the papers, his brow furrowing. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. He stared at her for a long time. Why? She looked past him, toward the house where 3 small silhouettes moved behind the curtain. Because they need you, she said softly. And maybe I do too. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He simply nodded, his throat working around something he couldn't say. For the next few days, the ranch held its breath. Evelyn kept the children busy, lessons, baking, chores, anything to keep them from overhearing the adults' worries. But at night, she could feel their fear pressing through the walls. One evening, Tom appeared in the doorway of her room, his small frame swallowed in the lamplight. Are we leaving? He asked quietly. She crossed the room, kneeling to meet his eyes. No, sweetheart. You're home. No one's taking you from here. But that man said, I know what he said. She interrupted gently. But sometimes people with loud voices are wrong. They don't see what's real. He hesitated, then nodded, trusting her more than her words. When he left, she sat on the edge of her bed, her heart twisting tight. 2 days later, another knock came at the door. This time, it wasn't the marshal. It was a woman in a gray coat, clipboard in hand. Her tone was sharp, her eyes colder than the mountain wind. She inspected every room, every shelf, every loaf of bread cooling on the counter. The children clung to Evelyn's skirt, whispering. When the woman left, Luke's patience broke. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass. She looked at them like they were stock, he said through clenched teeth. Like they're nothing but numbers on a paper. Evelyn laid a hand on his arm. Let her look. Let them all look. They'll see the truth eventually. His jaw tightened, but her touch steadied him. You've got more fight in you than most men I know. Because I'm fighting for something worth keeping. That night they sat together by the fire, both too tired for words. The air between them was thick, full of things neither dared say aloud. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. You said once this place makes you tired in the right way. I think I understand that now. He glanced over. And what way is that? The kind that reminds you what's worth waking up for. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, everything between them changed. His hand brushed hers, and though neither of them moved closer, neither pulled away. Days passed in a blur of waiting. Letters were sent, replies returned. The tension grew heavy enough to bend the air. The night before the hearing, the children couldn't sleep. Evelyn sat by the fire with them until their eyes closed one by one. She watched their chests rise and fall, the quiet rhythm of trust and innocence that had no idea how close it was to being broken. Luke came in quietly, standing in the doorway. They're asleep? Yes, he stepped closer, voice low. I've been thinking, if they take them, I'll ride with them, wherever they go. She stood, meeting his gaze. And leave this place? If I have to. Her eyes filled before she could stop it. You can't save them that way. Then how? By standing your ground, she whispered. By showing them what a father looks like. He closed the space between them, his breath unsteady. "And what about you, Evelyn? Where do you fit in all this?" Her answer was soft but sure. "Right here, wherever they are." Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping through the valley. It whistled through the cracks of the house like a warning, or maybe a promise. The hearing was coming, and with it the storm that would decide everything. But for now, under the glow of the firelight, their shadows touched on the floor side by side, unbroken. The storm came before dawn, roaring down the valley like the mountains themselves had turned to thunder. Wind tore through the pines, rattling the windows until the glass moaned. Evelyn woke to the sound of rain slamming against the roof and the faint cry of a child somewhere down the hall. She threw on her shawl and hurried through the dark corridor, heart pounding. Ruth's bed was empty. Her voice broke into the storm. "Ruth," the wind swallowed the name. She ran to the back door, fumbling with the latch, and the door blew open, nearly ripping off its hinges. The rain hit her like cold stones. Outside, lightning split the sky, and for an instant she saw a small figure near the fence line, moving through the mud. "Luke!" she shouted, her voice barely audible. He was already on his feet, pulling on his coat. Within seconds, he was beside her, rain streaming from his hair. "She's out there!" Evelyn gasped. "Near the pasture." He didn't hesitate. "Stay with the others." "No," she said fiercely, gripping his arm. "I'm coming." They plunged into the storm together, boots sinking into the soaked ground. The rain came sideways, slicing through the dark, and the wind howled with the voice of the earth itself. Evelyn's skirt clung to her legs, her hair whipped across her face. She could barely see Luke ahead of her, a shadow moving through sheets of lightning. "Ruth!" he shouted. "Call out to me, sweetheart." A faint cry answered, thin and terrified. Evelyn followed the sound, her heart cracking with each step. They found her at the edge of the corral, huddled under a broken gate, shivering and barefoot. Evelyn dropped to her knees, wrapping her shawl around the child. "Oh, baby, you're all right, she whispered, voice shaking. Luke crouched beside them, his hand steady on Evelyn's shoulder. "Let's get her inside." The three of them stumbled back toward the house, fighting the wind. By the time they reached the porch, lightning flashed again and struck the far end of the barn. Fire leapt up, wild and sudden, red against the black sky. Luke turned instantly. "The horses!" "Luke, no!" Evelyn shouted, clutching Ruth. "You'll get yourself killed." But he was already running through the storm, into the blaze that began to lick at the barn walls. Evelyn set Ruth down near the doorway and ran after him, the rain hissing as it met the flames. She reached the entrance just as Luke burst out, dragging one terrified mare by the reins. Another horse bolted past him, eyes white with fear. He coughed, voice raw from smoke. "Get her inside now." "I'm not leaving you." "You will if you want me to come back." Their eyes locked for one endless second. Then she turned, carrying Ruth inside. The fire roared behind her and her tears mixed with the rain. Hours later, when the flames were finally drowned by the storm, Luke came back soaked, his face blackened with soot. The barn was half gone, but the horses were safe. Evelyn met him at the door, trembling. "You fool," she whispered, pressing her hands against his chest. "You could have died." He caught her hands, holding them tight. "I told you once," he said, voice low. "I don't lose what's mine if I can help it." Her breath caught. For a moment, everything, the storm, the smoke, the fear, fell away. There was only him, rain dripping from his hair, eyes burning with something deeper than fire. "And what am I, Luke?" she asked, barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer with words. His hand came up, rough thumb tracing her cheek, and she leaned into the touch like someone who'd been starving for warmth. The silence between them said everything it needed to. When morning finally broke, the world lay washed clean. The hills shone silver under the pale sun, steam rising from the wet earth. Ruth was feverish but breathing steady. The children clung to Evelyn while Luke stood outside, watching the smoke drift from what was left of the barn. By noon, the sound of carriage wheels cut through the stillness. 2 men in clean coats stepped out, hats polished, papers in hand. The county officials. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. Luke met them in the yard, his posture rigid, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Evelyn stood beside him, the children huddled behind her. One of the men unfolded a document. "Mr. Harland," he began, "we're here regarding the guardianship hearing. The marshal sent word about last night's storm, but we're required to deliver the verdict in person." Evelyn's fingers dug into her skirt. Luke's jaw flexed once. "Go on." The man cleared his throat, glancing between them. "After reviewing testimony from the church, the school, And several residents of Bozeman, he paused, shifting his tone. And a letter submitted by Miss Ward on your behalf. The court finds that the Harland household meets the conditions for permanent guardianship. The children remain in your care. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. Ada's hand slipped into hers. Then Luke exhaled, long and slow, like a man waking from a nightmare. You mean, they stay? They stay, the man confirmed, handing him the signed letter. Congratulations, Mr. Harland. The officials tipped their hats and left as quietly as they'd come, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering through the wet grass. Luke turned to Evelyn, disbelief softening into something gentler. You wrote them? She nodded, tears already spilling. I had to try. He looked down at the paper in his hands, then at the children running toward him, laughter bursting out of them like sunlight. When Ruth leapt into his arms, he held her close, eyes shining. Evelyn stood on the porch watching the scene unfold, the way the children clung to him, the way he looked at them like they were all he'd ever needed. And when his gaze finally found hers, something wordless passed between them, gratitude, love, and the quiet knowledge that neither of them was alone anymore. That night, the house glowed with a kind of warmth no fire could make. The children slept in a heap of quilts near the hearth. Evelyn sat at the table, sewing a tear in one of Ruth's dresses. Luke came in quietly, setting down a steaming mug beside her. You should rest, he said. I will, she replied, without looking up. Eventually, he sat across from her, arms folded, watching her hands move. After a long pause, he said softly, I don't much like the word guardian. Sounds too cold for what we are. She smiled faintly. Then what are we, Luke? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A family, not by birth but by choice. And I don't ever want it to be anything less than that. Her stitching faltered. She looked at him, really looked, and the weight of everything, the storm, the fear, the years they'd both spent alone, settled into something quiet and sure. You mean that? He nodded. I do. The room fell still except for the faint pop of the fire. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, its edges rough and worn. He opened it, revealing a simple silver ring, slightly tarnished but beautiful in its honesty. This was my mother's, he said. I kept it because I thought one day I'd know who it belonged to next. Her breath caught. Luke, he slid the box across the table. You don't owe me an answer tonight. But I figure the children deserve to wake up to a house that's more than just walls and a name. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes filled with tears, and she closed the box gently. If I say yes, she whispered, it's not because they need me. It's because I need this. All of it. You. He smiled then, a real unguarded smile that reached his eyes. Then that's all the answer I'll ever need. They sat in silence, two people who had wandered too long finally finding a place that felt like home. The fire burned low, the night stretched soft and forgiving around them, and for the first time, neither of them feared tomorrow. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The barn was rebuilt, the fields turned green again, and laughter echoed from the hills. On a mild afternoon, under a wide sky, Luke and Evelyn stood beneath the same oak tree where she had once taught the children their letters. The preacher's words were simple, his voice steady. The children stood close, each holding a flower picked from the field. When the vows were spoken, Luke took her hands. You gave this house back its heart, he said quietly. You gave me back mine. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile held steady. And you gave me something I thought I'd never have again. A life that feels alive. He leaned forward, kissed her softly, and the valley seemed to breathe again. As the sun dipped low, the family gathered on the porch. Ada and Ruth chased fireflies while Tom tried to catch one in his hat. Luke stood behind Evelyn, his arms circling her waist, both of them watching the golden light fade. This land's got a way of reminding you what matters, he murmured. She tilted her head against him. And what's that? He kissed her hair. Who you come home to? The wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. Behind them, the children laughed. Ahead of them, the horizon burned gold. And for the first time in a long, long while, Evelyn Ward felt the world settle into something she could finally call her own. Love, peace, and a home that had waited all its life for her to find it.